Okay, everyone, welcome. It's Tim Richter here, Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this webinar to introduce the Vote Housing campaign. So many of you would have heard a bit about the campaign from previous webinars with on Recovery for All, but what we're going to do today, my colleague here, Zane Belge, is going to go through the campaign. We're getting ready to launch next week. So we wanted to give everyone a chance to just get a bit of a deep dive into the key elements of the campaign and the strategy, and give you an opportunity to ask any questions. As you know, as many of you would have suspected or you would have heard, we think that there is a federal election in the offing. You never know with these things, but we wanted to make sure that we are ready. As you know, as everybody knows, and as I've said till I'm blue in the face, that homelessness and housing need in Canada is a product of policy change, is a product of policy decisions by the federal and provincial governments. And for us to end homelessness, for us to address housing need, we need to make sure that people who have experienced homelessness, people who are in housing need, and the people who care about them have power in the political process. And that's what the Vote Housing campaign is all about. So I'll get Zane to flip ahead to the next screen here. So this is our agenda. We're going to go over the campaign, the objectives, the brand, the platform, the phases and the tactics, and how you can help. The last part, I think, is the most important. I know all of you have been working super hard. I know you've all been sort of busy through the pandemic, but when you have 6,000 lobbyists in Ottawa, all pushing the federal government of whatever stripe that federal government might be on their particular issue, we need to be at those tables. And all those lobbyists, most of them are, they are paid, they're hired guns, as it were. They have money, but what we have, they don't have, is people. And that is our competitive advantage. That's where you come in, but that's why also we need so much of your help. Just get you to flip ahead one more, Zane. So just a bit of housekeeping. Everyone's muted, so it's there will be a lot of people on this call. There's a lot of stuff to go over. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and feel free to chat with your peers. Give us feedback through the chat, and we will be watching that through the presentation. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zane, and he is going to run through the presentation with you today. Over to you, Zane.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are doing well. I'm going to spend the next 15-20 minutes just giving you some of the high-level updates on where we've been since perhaps the last time you've heard us speak about the Vote Housing campaign and what's coming up in the days ahead. Very exciting that we've had this opportunity to chat with you. And we're very excited for what's going to happen next Thursday, which is the launch of Vote Housing. But before we get into all the minor details around what's launching when and the bigger details thereafter of how to help, let me walk you through some of the 101 on what we're trying to do with the campaign. And the basic thrust here is that we are trying to erect a national nonpartisan housing campaign to end homelessness and housing need in Canada. And we're really fortunate to have 4 partner organizations that we're working with: the CAH, the Cooperative Housing Federation, the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network, and the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. And together, they've been, these 4 partners are the ones that have kind of, erected the first phase of this campaign. But what we really know is that for our campaign to have any chance at success, it just can't be a campaign of us speaking to ourselves. It has to be a campaign that broadens out, that expands, that brings folks into the fold. So kind of like how Recovery for All did, we know that our secret sauce, as Tim mentioned up front, is everyday Canadians. It's people within our communities, our families, etc. So our goal here is to stand this campaign up and then to really use the energy, the enthusiasm that folks like yourself have brought into the fold to have folks across the country say that, you know what, I'm signing up on this campaign and I'm pledging to vote housing in this campaign. And when we say pledging to vote housing, what we mean very simply, is not a partisan exercise of saying, that means you're voting for this particular party, that you're voting for this particular individual as your candidate. What it means is that you as an individual or as an organization are saying this election, whenever we go to the polls to mark an X on a ballot, we are going to be very cognizant that housing is a filter we view our vote through. Let me say that again, that housing is a filter that we view our vote through, which means that in order for us to actually move on a certain item, we're going to ensure that political parties, regardless of which color jersey they wear, have housing on their platform. And if they don't, that's not something, that may not be a party we consider. So this campaign will not push in any direction. It will probably do a survey to indicate where the political parties stand on the core issues we care about. And Tim will explain later on about the 6 platform points that we're putting out there. But our secret sauce here is to get Canadians across the country to do what we hope that you will do early on in the campaign, which is to put up your hand, sign on and say, I will pledge to vote housing this election, meaning that I will ensure that housing is a core part of what makes my decision in terms of which political party I vote for in this coming election. And when we kind of boil it down, our ambition here is a bold one. We want to erect the largest nonpartisan housing advocacy campaign in Canadian history. We want to take advantage of the fact that we're in this golden opportunity where our issues are becoming more and more salient. We know that there's a government right now that was going to perhaps go into a federal election. And we want to ensure that any progress that we have made over the many years in the past is not lost, both for this election and any time in the future. And as Tim mentioned early on, the way we ensure our issues are undeniable evermore is to ensure that our coalition of everyday Canadians is also undeniable. And the way we do that is by volume of voice, and volume also in size, how many of us there are across the country. So this campaign is designed to put itself out there and try to get as many Canadians as possible to say, you know what, I'm going to vote housing. I am going to join this initiative. I'm going to view this election through the vote housing lens. And the more that we can do that, the more our issues of homelessness and ending it, of core housing need and ending it, become undeniable in this election for sure, but hopefully ever more as we keep advocating. And I will say that with the unique partnerships that we've formed, we're not starting from zero. I think every single one of you on this call has participated in some way, shape, or form in Recovery for All. Once again, thank you for doing that. It has been an unbelievable opportunity to see where we've kind of gone in the span of about a year, from starting a campaign to having multiple billions of dollars in government commitments. But that campaign taught us something. Hopefully you got something out of it too, but it taught us something on how to organize digitally, how to ensure we have a coalition that's available and present with us. But then we also take on some of the added advantages that our partners bring, like the Co-op Housing Federation, which have got tens of thousands of Canadians across this country who live in co-op facilities. You might be one of them. So to access their network of not just members across the country, but their long history, as you'll see with the photos on the right, of advocating in community, of going out and pushing for housing and housing affordability needs across the country, will also be a massive advantage. We then couple that advantage with the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association and their membership and their advocacy on the implementation of, for example, as you see here, the urban, rural, northern Indigenous housing strategy. And then we wrap that in with the voices of the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network, individuals who have had lived experience with homelessness and housing need, to ensure that our campaign not just houses their particular viewpoints and voice, but is driven in many cases with their leadership at the table on decision making. So we've got that advocacy experience that is existing and that we start with on day one. So you might be asking, Zane, what are you trying to do? You've got this brand, this ambition, you got the partnerships. What are we trying to do? Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to merge the best practices of grassroots organizing with digital advocacy. And to put that much more cleanly, we want to run a nonpartisan campaign just like the federal parties would. The only difference is that we're not going to wear a color of jersey like they do. Red, orange, blue, green, whatever that might be. We're not going to wear that color of jersey, but we're going to try to mimic what a political campaign will do in this country on a national level. It's a very broad ambition, which is why we need a ton of support. But what we feel like we need to do, as Tim mentioned up front, if policy and politics is what got us into this position of creating homelessness and housing need that we find today, then the way we combat that is with ourselves, is with us engaging in that politics, is engaging in that policy. So we're going to try to do what a political campaign would do with our people power that fuels it. And as I mentioned, the unique partnerships, as I just talked about, are what are going to get us started here. So how exactly will we do it? Well, we know that this election will have something called swing ridings, ridings that are going to be hotly contested. And it's also going to be where the election is fought and more than likely won. So what we want to do is in those ridings in particular, as well as in every other part of the country, and I'll talk to you about that, we want to showcase that our case is strong, which means we want to showcase that our case for housing, our volume of people in communities that care about vote housing as a concept, but also as a campaign, is voluminous, that we've got a lot of people who care about this. And the way we do that is we grow a national coalition. We reach out, knocking on doors. We go out on social media with some digital advertising. You know, we're not a big budget campaign, not in the least. But what we will do is try to target and try to ensure we can build coalitions in these areas of supporters, endorsers, and volunteers and regional leads to showcase that our case is strong, that we are building not just a campaign, but a movement. And what our main ask of everyone will be to say, can you pledge to vote housing? That is going to be our fundamental ask in this election, which is, we're not going to tell you which party to vote for. We're going to ask you, will you pledge to vote housing this election? And the more of us there are across this country that are pledging to vote housing, the greater note our political parties and our candidates and our political leaders will take, that we will not be ignored and our issues will not be ignored because our coalition is both loud and strong. And then our final point here that we will do is we'll try to mobilize, just like a political party would, try to encourage folks at the end of this campaign, whenever it might be, to vote housing, to ensure that you take stock of what's happened in this election, to take stock of what's happened with what the political parties are telling you, and show up to the polls with the housing mindset as a key decider in terms of how you'll vote. The brand, and I want to talk to you about the brand a bit more because I think it's really important. Not just the colors, but the meaning behind it. And I really want to see if it translates with you and hope it does, which is we wanted our brand to be simple and values-based. In its right, vote housing is an action. It is telling you exactly what you need to do, and that's by design. We want it to be action-oriented. We want it to be very much about there's a construct here, and it is to vote housing. It doesn't take a lot of explanation or reams of ink to be spilled to understand what we're trying to get people to do. We're also trying to ensure that it's an access point that makes sense to many. Housing issues and affordability issues across the country are on the rise. And while our campaign is about housing need and homelessness, we don't want to disclude or exclude people, I should say, that want to come into a campaign that might view the housing territory slightly differently, but it's still relevant to them. We'll ensure that when they get into the fold that, you know, we tell them about what our campaign's about and why we care about this issue and what the broader construct of housing affordability and housing need are in this country. But we don't want to exclude people who might have a different onboard onto the campaign, which is why it's simple and values-based as well. We also want to ensure it's vibrant. We've chosen colors deliberately that are not the standard political colors. Pink, you know, or hot pink, purple, and a bright yellow / neon yellow green are not colors you see in a political campaign, but it also is on purpose. We want to ensure that this is a campaign of optimism. These are colors of optimism, of hope, and of empowerment. And I think for too long, the question around homelessness and housing need has been viewed with not just language, but with colors that kind of resemble almost, you know, help us if you can. You know, we're ensure we don't become an afterthought, versus our campaign is very much about, we are here, we're a movement, we are reharnessing and regaining control of this issue with the power that we have as either individuals with lived experience, folks that have worked or are engaged in the sector, or everyday Canadians that care about this issue. This is as much of a campaign about ensuring people pledge to vote housing as it is a campaign about us who are organizing and supporting to ensure we feel empowered and optimistic about the future. Because if we don't, no campaign necessarily moves forward. And we want to ensure we have fun while doing it. That's why the vibrancy of this campaign is really dictated, not on the colors, but it's a start. It starts there to show that we want to have something that is vibrant and bold and outward looking in that regard. And there you'll see the brand and the colors. And here you'll see, you know, as part of our launch, you'll see on the 17th, we shot a campaign video where we have a bunch of us kind of going out, organizing in community, making phone calls, hitting up the doors, installing lawn signs. That's what this campaign is going to be about. It's going to be about a bunch of people in the simplest terms, having fun while trying to create a social outcome that we haven't seen ever before in Canadian history on housing and homelessness. We know that any campaign, whether it's partisan or not, and ours is not, let me be clear again, it's only as fun as the people that you do it with. And while we're trying to do this across the country, we're going to ensure that you're plugged into what's going on, that we enjoy ourselves while we do this, while there's a sense of optimism and vibrancy in the summer to what we're doing. So these colors are a start. Your energy and additive enthusiasm will kind of take that into next year. But this kind of gives you a sense of some of the brand out in the field, what it looks like, and what it might look like in community as well. And let me jump into the platform, and I'll throw it over to Tim there. And what I'll kind of say about the platform is kind of what I outlined earlier before I throw it over to Tim, which is we wanted to keep it relatively high level, values-based, so that folks who come into the campaign don't look at the platform as a reason to not join, but see it as something that they can see themselves and their conditions or their lived experience in, and use that as a starting point to create a conversation and to elevate people to say, yeah, I can support. And then as soon as they support, jump into the campaign to, you know, perhaps volunteer or become regional leads, et cetera. So the platform will play a very critical role, but I did want to make that one sort of footnote about the high level before I hand it over to Tim. So Tim, I'll kind of throw that up there and then throw it over to you as well.
For sure. So thanks, Zane. So there's a bit of an art to platform building. So first thing we wanted to do is make sure that the key elements of this platform will be essential in ending homelessness and housing need in Canada. Two, we want to make sure, as Zane says, that it's also at a fairly high level because we're trying to bring people to the campaign. So we're looking to create, as they say in politics, a big tent where many people will be able to see themselves in it, but we probably can't get everything everyone wants, right? But we want to make sure it's credible. We also want to make sure that we set a minimum expectation for all political parties on what needs to be included in a platform like this if you wanted to end homelessness and core housing need, but again, not leave it so specific that they can't find themselves in it as well, right? That they can't bring their own ideas to it, but it sets kind of a benchmark. But like the Recovery for All campaign, and most of this will look fairly familiar to all of you who were involved in the vote or the Recovery for All campaign, there are 6 key elements. The first, we talked about implementing an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. This was in the Recovery for All campaign, but we've put it here first on purpose to make sure that we're clearly signaling the importance of dealing with urban Indigenous housing in Canada. 2, we have as table stakes, as basically a foundational element and a commitment that government must commit to the prevention and elimination of homelessness in Canada. The federal government, as a response to the Recovery for All campaign, committed to ending chronic homelessness, but again, chronic homelessness is not all homelessness. On point 3 and point 4, it's really important for us to talk about housing construction. So to put this in context, the existing national housing strategy commits over 10 years to build 150,000 new units. There was a lot of money put into repair of other units. There's money put into the, a bunch of money put into loans and things in the national housing strategy for market units. But we want to make sure there's at least 350,000 new units of deeply affordable non-market co-op and non-profit housing over a decade, and 50,000 units of supportive housing over a decade. That, to me, a decade is a fairly long time, and we could push them to do more. Many of you will remember that in the 80s, Canada was producing 25,000 units of housing per year. So this is an achievable goal. The fifth element is about the progressive realization of the right to housing, but importantly includes measures to curtail the impact of financialization on the rental housing market. I really would have liked to say, you know, implement the right to housing, and if you're in a hole, stop digging, could have been this point, because we're losing housing in Canada faster than we can replace it. We're losing housing at a rate in between 2011 and 2016. Canada lost 320,000 units of what Steve Pomeroy calls naturally occurring affordable housing. We need to ensure that that's not there, that hole is stopped, and we need to get governments to commit to that. But it's also important that we address the unique needs of equity-seeking communities in the National Housing Strategy. We've seen through the pandemic that racialized peoples, Indigenous peoples, folks living in are among the folks living in core housing need, and they've been disproportionately impacted, and they are disproportionately impacted by housing needs. So we have to make sure that those are seen, and that people with lived expertise and lived experience of housing need and homelessness are engaged at all levels of policy development and implementation. And the last point is about expanding rental assistance for low-income households to reduce core housing need and prevent a wave of new homelessness. And this addresses a couple of issues. One, we know from new data out of CMHC that 3/4 of people experiencing core housing need get themselves out inside 5 years, which means that there is a movement through housing need, and people in housing need are in housing. Some of it's obviously unaffordable, some of it's substandard, but housing supports and housing assistance are a critical strategy in reducing housing need, because a lot of housing need is frankly financial. But also we know that there are many Canadians, at least over 150,000 last time I checked, households who are now in rental arrears due to the economic impact of the pandemic, despite federal assistance. And so we need to make sure that that rental assistance is there to prevent a wave of new homelessness coming out of the pandemic. So that in a nutshell is the platform. So we'll have more information on each of these points articulated on the Vote Housing website for everybody to see. Dane.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Yeah. I'll jump in through the phase, and of course, if there's any questions on anything thus far, please feel free. Just a reminder to throw it into the Q&A function. Tim and I will kind of circle in on questions at the end. We've got plenty of time to do that with all of you. This campaign is kind of constructed in 3 distinct phases from a campaign, if you can call it strategy or tactics or activity sense. And the 3 phases start with the first phase, which is what we're doing right now, which is outside of having these calls, which we love to do, kind of showcasing the campaign. Our teams are hard at work putting together this campaign, putting together what we call a campaign in the can, which is, okay, we've got our branding, we're happy with it, we hope you like it too, we shot our video, we're developing our website, and it's all kind of leading towards next Thursday when we officially launch. And next Thursday is a big day for us because we kind of let everyone know this is happening, which you know, right now we're in what Tim would call the worst kept secret mode, which I really like, which is, you know, why we're telling you and letting you know in advance and wanting you to jump on board prior to. But as soon as we launch on that 17th, we hit into phase 2, which is a campaign growth phase, which is what I like to call the launch month, which is, we know that traditional advocacy campaigns, even in the digital sense, launch day is great, but really sustaining and growing momentum over that first month is going to be super crucial for us. So what we're going to try to do is ensure that we have a good launch day with your help and support, and that we then are able to onboard more and more folks, have people indicate their interest in not just supporting and pledging to vote housing as a first step on the ladder, but joining us to volunteer in community, joining us to volunteer online, you know, engaging their friends, their family to jump onto the campaign. So that's that campaign growth phase where we build out our field team, build out our volunteer base, you know, figure out our activities, do some events online, more like this, get to hear from you around how things are going. That's that second phase. And then the third phase is when we don't know just yet. We'll hopefully get an indication as the summer rolls around where the writ will drop, and we will be in an election campaign. The parties will be in an election campaign, and frankly, so will we, which means our door knocking ramps up, our things like lawn signs, as you saw there, show up on our streets across the country, knock on wood. We have volunteers in community. We're doing phone calls. People are reaching out to their family. And then we're kind of going to build that campaign up, sign as many people we can, the pledge to get them to vote housing. And then we do what a political campaign does, which is none of that activity is useful unless we mobilize people. None of that activity is useful unless we say, great, thank you for signing on board. We need you to now go and vote. And the true sort of power that we have as a group, as folks talking right now on the ground floor, is if we can actually not just build our movement, but mobilize our movement, mobilize them to the polls, mobilize them at events prior to, mobilize them in community, and really showcase that political power that we hope that we will have built over the course of this summer, heading into, I say the fall, but whenever that election might be. So those are the three phases between when we started to June 17th, we launch, June 17th till the election, and then election period is that third phase there. So what are we going to be doing? Well, the long answer is a variety of stuff. Let me give you the short answer and a bit of philosophy behind it, which is we want to merge the best of what digital is, digital marketing, with grassroots. On the right-hand side, it's what a political party does on the ground. Knocking on doors, organizing, literature drops, phone calling, Zoom parties, pandemic and post-pandemic activities combined together, but it's that contact with community. And then we want to do the side on the left, which was a lot of what you saw during Recovery for All. Our web, our sign up, our iterative campaigns, mini campaigns that we run, email marketing. We're going to add text messaging to this list and relational organizing. So folks don't have to be in our 70 swing ridings. They can be anywhere in the country and organize for us digitally in any way possible. But in the intersection of digital and grassroots is where Vote Housing sits, which is why we, have dubbed it with humility, the largest nonpartisan housing campaign in Canadian history, which is the ability to do what we've done in Recovery for All and then add the expansion pack, which is the grassroots, people in their community, hitting up doors, talking to friends and family wherever they are, with a special focus on those 70 areas, but wherever they are, increasing the size of our big tent, increasing the size of our coalition. I'll say it again, we're only successful if we truly harness the people power of everyday Canadians coming into the fold, right? So that is what makes this incredibly powerful and successful. It's not that we're spending millions of dollars, and trust me, there are going to be organizations that will spend close to that, if not more, to organize and erect a campaign. We are not one of those. While we do have a little bit of budget for advertising and video work and stuff like that to make sure our campaign resonates, is strong, and can reach folks, our true asset here is each of us, is all of us to move that forward. Which kind of brings me to this slide, which is how to help. And I start with this. And if you've seen me speak at Recovery for All presentations before, I really have an affinity to this slide for a very particular reason, because I still think, despite it being some 80, 90 years old, it still has that unbelievable resonance, which is in the 1930s, when FDR was president of the United States, he met with a special interest group in his office, and they pitched him. At that moment, the record says for about 90 minutes, they pitched him on this thing that they wanted from the president of the United States. And all he said was this quote. That's what rumor says, that all he said at the end was, great, I agree with you. I want to do it. Now make me do it. And these advocates and activists left that meeting, said, well, that was a heck of a mixed message. He clearly bought the pitch. He wants to do it. Now didn't we just tell him what we wanted? Like, didn't we just make him do it? He's the president of the United States. Can't he just do it? And the short answer to that is yes, he can. And the long answer to that is not that simply. And what he was actually meaning by that quote was that he desired a parade of everyday Americans to indicate to him, A, that the problem that these activists and advocates were telling him was real and warranted, and B, that they also agreed with and wanted that solution. And while we're not speaking to a president or a prime minister specifically in this campaign, this truth still holds, which is, I go back to it, if we can say that what we believe as a small circle, that our 6 points make great sense, That's awesome. We could pitch any political party on that, and we'd hope that they agree with us. But where our true power comes in is if we can say it's not just, us on this webinar and these 4 organizations and these endorsing partners, but it's quite literally thousands of Canadians forming this parade that also want this. That's what solves the last part of that statement. That's what is the answer to now make me do it. The only thing that we know that makes politicians pay attention, whether they're the president of the United States or running to be your MP in your local riding, is people. How many people want this? And like I say again, the way our issues become undeniable is if we become undeniable with the size of our parade and the volume we speak at. And so this FDR quote kind of really, grounds me in terms of what we are trying to do here. Which brings me to this. We've got a ladder of engagement. You may have heard me use that term in the past. And if you haven't, what I mean by that is there's a first step on the ladder, a second step, a third step, and many more steps that we have that folks might be able to contribute with. The first step on that ladder is when we launch on the 17th, we would absolutely love if you could join, just like you have RFA, the Vote Housing campaign by pledging to vote housing this election. It will mean a lot. You'll sign up to the campaign, we will send you updates, we'll have iterative activities to get to know one another, to meet each other, to organize in communities, to maybe elevate that level of engagement, to volunteer with us in community, with your friends and family, with others that you may not know, but we're trying to build a movement here. So the first step of supporting and then hopefully advancing that into volunteering, etc., would be tremendously helpful. The second step here is endorsing us. And endorsing us as a campaign would be really, really helpful, especially prior to launch, i.e. the next 7 days. And I know many of you are individuals, but I know many of you speaking here today also work on behalf of an organization, speak on behalf of an organization. And so we'd love your endorsement personally or organizationally to the campaign. And if it's an organization, we'll add your logo to the website. We'll send you some materials in advance of the launch on the 17th. And hopefully you can help us amplify that launch through your email lists and your social network on that day. And we'll do the same if you're an endorser personally as well, but that would be tremendously helpful. And then finally, if you as an organization or individual have the ability to contribute a larger amount, both financially or in kind at an organization to lend us some support of staff secondments, or if you yourself have time to volunteer on this campaign at a senior level, we're more than open to chatting about that. Or if you have access to volunteers in community, of course, more than happy to chat about all that as well. That would be tremendously, tremendously helpful at that contributor level. So as you start as a supporter to pledge to vote housing, hopefully elevate to volunteer and have more involvement in the campaign, endorse us, hopefully before this launch, certainly after, we're open to it as well. And more than we're excited to have folks join us and then contribute to our campaign is that third step of the ladder. Let me just double click on a few things I mentioned here. If you have individuals, if you speak on behalf of a team or run a team, here's some of the positions we're looking for at our core team to help join myself and Tim and others. We're looking for communicators and marketers and writers and designers to jump into the fold. Also, if you've got experience in volunteer management or field organizing or community engagement or want to be a lead in your community to organize, that would also be helpful, as long as in addition to, I should say, the financial contributions we mentioned here as well. On the volunteer side, we're looking for a few things as well. If you have a couple of hours, excuse me, in community, if you can knock on doors, call on phone, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, I was just gonna sneeze there, apologies. Help with street team organizing, event plan, 2 to 4 hours a week. If you can give that minimum, we'd love to have you on board as an offline volunteer. Same deal, 2 to 4 hours, we'd love to have you on board online, helping us organize Zoom meetings and calls with community, digitally organizing, helping to send notes to friends and family, etc. And then finally, if you got a bit more capacity, do you want to be a regional lead for us? Do you want to lead a group of volunteers for us in a particular part of the country, in your neighborhood, in your community? We're also looking for folks to help us out there as well. So what's next? Well, this kind of brings me to the end before we ask some questions. We're going to launch on the 17th, which means our website, our video, our pledge, our volunteer recruitment will all be live. In the meantime, we're looking for endorsement. I'll share a link in the chat thereafter as soon as we're done, and we'll also email you with that link thereafter. And then if you have folks, if you speak on behalf of a team to either lend us some resources on the campaign or financially contribute, Like I said, we are not run on big dollars. Recovery for All was not run on big dollars, but we were run on a big ambition and a desire to ensure that the political motivations that were impressed upon those with lived experience, those who struggle with housing need, is now fought back with, if I can say, with political power by organizing together, by having fun together, but by still doing it in a way that ensures that forevermore, our issues of ending homelessness and ending housing need in this country are not treated as an afterthought or just a nice to have, but they are treated as a fundamental issue that any political party in this country needs to address. So I just want to thank you for your time there. And I know we've got a few minutes for questions, so maybe I'll stop sharing my screen and throw it over to Tim to see if there's anything else he wants to add before we jump into the Q&A there.
Right on. Well, we're gonna jump into. There's a bunch of questions in the queue. If
Perfect.
you have any questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get through as many of them as we can. You know, a couple of things I think is worth highlighting. Like we said, you know, like that, you know, quote from FDR. There's a comment here about how do you, you know, all parties are going to have housing in their platform. How are we going to be able to, you know, tell which party is actually going to keep their promise? Well, you can't tell which party is going to actually keep their promise. You have to make parties keep their promise, right? If you watch how politics is unfolding in Canada, there's no parties, it doesn't seem anyway, with grand visions and grand plans, and where they're basically using their platforms to pull together voting coalitions to get enough votes to win an election. We want to make sure that they believe and they know that they have to support housing. They have to support ending homelessness in order to get elected, because there's just that many people who are supporting it. And so that is a big part of it. The other part that we're trying to get out of this, and this is part of RFA too, and I hate to use sort of military analogies, but we want to build a standing army, right? We want to build a standing army of skilled, trained, effective advocates. And then we work together kind of a loose army, a loose band of people, so that coming out of this campaign, we'll be able, like all of you will have the training and the skills and the experience, so that, you know, we can keep the pressure on government long after this campaign, and then we'll be able to roll into the next campaign as we grow over time, right? And not only that, we'll be able to turn this capacity on to other levels of government who contribute to homelessness or could be doing more to end it. So this is a long game, but this is also a moment in time where we build that movement, where we have, you know, grassroots organizers in place all over the country that are able to reach out to their MPs or MPPs or MLAs, that are able to put pressure on government to keep housing on the agenda, so that every government knows in order to get elected, they need to have housing on their agenda. They need to be committing to ending homelessness. And if they even begin to think about flipping back to that austerity agenda that creates homelessness, they will be punished at the polls if they do so, right? But again, this is a nonpartisan campaign, and it has to be very carefully nonpartisan for all kinds of reasons. But this is our moment to build the movement, to build that standing army, to make sure that homelessness ends in this country. So there's several questions here. We're going to try and get through as many as we can, but Robert has a good question, Zane, about could we explain what would be required as a regional lead in this campaign, what regional lead in sort of our grassroots organization?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So what we're looking for is folks that have capacity of, you know, I'm not going to say like full-time capacity because it's not that, but, you know, 10 plus hours a week to organize those that have indicated in your community that they're interested. It could be a region as big as a riding, or small as a riding, or as larger to a particular region, to say, I want to help. And so we'll give you the support to organize those volunteers, helps kind of schedule those shifts, have them out for door knocking, for lit drops, et cetera. You're kind of the conduit towards the heartbeat of the Vote Housing grassroots organization in that particular region. Like I said, small as a riding or as large as a city in certain cases, but you're the conduit and the point person to kind of really say, I'm willing to take the baton in London, or in London Center, for example, and I'm going to run this thing here, and we'll provide you the assets and what you need, and then the training for the team. But it's really trying to, build that coalition on the ground. Can you be our point person to not just, with the volunteers that have come through, but continue building that movement on the ground in each of those areas? So that's what we're looking for. It's very much modeled on a traditional political campaign where, you don't rely so much on the dollared resources on the ground, but on the people power that you have to help move opinion, move votes, and kind of have people join together and do a series of activities on the ground there.
Awesome. We have a question that says, more of a policy question. It said, throughout Canada's history, speculation has been a problem, but the advent of the financialized economy has exacerbated this. Can it be stopped, and if so, how? Well, that's the multi-billion-dollar question. I think there are solutions. It's probably going to be a mix of regulatory and programmatic and financial. So regulatory being measures to address, how banks and REITs and others are able to, engage in this kind of activity. Could be programmatic, where you develop a nonprofit housing or a nonprofit REIT even. I've heard things like that mused about. We don't have all of those solutions, but I think the first step in that solution is making the commitment, appreciating that this is an issue, and making the commitment to address it. I know that there are folks in CMHC, the National Housing Council that I'm a co-chair of, is exploring some of these. I also know that I've also heard other organizations and other think tanks are beginning to think about this financialization question, and it's a big one and it's a challenging one. But we're gonna, again, people power is going to be important in these discussions, because those are challenging conversations with deeply entrenched interests, and we're going to have to think about how what those solutions look like. But having a 100,000, 200,000 supporters of a campaign like this demanding it be fixed will put resources into finding that solution. I wish I could tell you, do these 3 things and we'll fix it, because I don't have those answers just yet. But certainly we need to make sure there is a commitment to do so. Stephen's asking, during the campaign, will we provide an analysis or report on how the parties are addressing our 6 points? I know, Zane, you want to jump in and address it. The short answer is yes, but.
Yeah, no,
Zane wants to jump on.
That's exactly right. The but is, we can't put our thumb on the scale for any political party, right? As part of our nonpartisan approach, we will issue a report card without the grade letters, so to speak, and we can't do that, but we will certainly keep it as a survey. And maybe what I'll do is maybe answer the next question as well, which is, our hope is to have political parties themselves at the top answer those questions, right? So that we have, candidates who can freelance on the ground and say whatever, but we want on the record official party policy in terms of what they stand on each of those issues, which is, we're going to try to go straight to the top and then say, okay, here's where the parties stand. You can make your judgment, but we're not going to put our thumb on the scale as it relates to, which party to vote for. What we certainly will do is put that report out and say, to all you that have pledged, thank you for doing so. Here's where the parties have told us they stand with these questions on housing.
Here's an interesting point from Rosemary. And Rosemary, you're not alone. You're in the chat. She mentions, my only experience of door knocking turned me off ever doing it again. I believe that you think it'll be fun, but my experience doesn't suggest that it will be. Can you comment on this? And Zane and I have, I think, can both say with confidence we've had very uncomfortable door knocking experiences in one form or another. But there's some of that we'll want to do, but there's different ways that people engage in organizing in their communities that won't involve door knocking. Maybe Zane, you can talk to a few of those.
Yeah, several of them, right? As a cousin of door knocking, literature drops are always helpful sometimes. As an expansion of door knocking in a different way. Why, we don't have to have you knocking on doors of strangers. We can certainly have you organize small coffee parties of folks that your friends and family, and use that as a starting point to build, to talk about the campaign. Hosting events will be another thing, right? Self-organized events in community, town halls. So many different ways to get involved in the ground, helping us, in a variety of ways that don't involve door knocking. But what I will say, if I could make a quick pitch for door knocking, just so that I'm not deriding it so much, is that at the end of the day, what door knocking is really a exercise of showing up to another human being, whether you know them or not, and saying, here's why I'm doing something. And at the end of the day, I think we want to say that this whole campaign is very simply built on a why. Whether you are having that why of why you're involved in that campaign, and if you're thinking about getting involved, or if you were involved in RFA, the one exercise I always ask folks is just think about it. Why did you get involved? And as long as you have that 1 30-second answer with you, that is the same tool you use to talk to your cousin, to talk to your aunt, to talk to your friends, to post on social media, to hit up the doors. It's, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm here because would you like to join or learn more, right? And it's that same conversation spanned across different mediums, but at the heart of it is some exploration as to why you're here. Because here's the most exciting part about a campaign, is that while we have dozens of us on this webinar today, each one of us has a very different reason as to why we're here. And that reason is your sword and your shield. It is the reason that makes you special, and it makes your why so much more penetrative to those around you, because it's your reason. It's not my reason. It's not Tim's reason. We're not spoon feeding it to you. It's your reason. So door knocking to me is just an extension of that exercise. And especially if you do it with the community of folks, it can be quite kind of fun and a pretty interesting and very, very useful engagement.
Well, and to your point about the door knocking and the asking candidates how they're planning to engage, I think what that refers to is making sure that we're engaging candidates and parties at a lot of different levels. I think we're going to send a survey to each of the candidates, but what normally happens in those cases is that the candidates send those to the party, and the party tells them how to answer some of the key questions in the survey, and then they add their own bit in there. But so we're going to want them to see a survey. They're going to want to know that there's a lot of people watching, but we're also going to want them, when they have an all candidates forum, that they hear questions about housing, that they see the signs when they go door knocking, that when they go door knocking, people are saying, I got this flyer the other day about about housing, and I'm really worried about affordable housing. What are you gonna to do about it, right? What's your platform on homelessness, because this matters to me a lot. And so we want to make sure through a grassroots campaign that they're hearing about housing over and over and over and over and over again, so that they know that people care about it, and that they're gonna gauge themselves accordingly, and that they are communicating up to the people that are organizing that campaign, saying, geez, here in London Center or London West or whatever the riding is, I'm hearing about homelessness a lot. Right? Edmonton, there was a story just the other day about the voting intent going into the municipal election in November, saying, where a lot of people are talking about homelessness is one of the top 3 issues, and so we want to make sure that issue is on the lips of every voter and every candidate. Bill's got a couple of questions. He's asking, what are the chances of launching the campaign on National Indigenous Peoples Day, and when will the website go up? So good point, Bill. I wouldn't want to launch on National Indigenous Peoples Day, because I wouldn't want to take anything away from that day, right? Like I wouldn't want to camp out, so to speak, on an issue that isn't as important by coming before and highlighting urban Indigenous housing issues. I think it's very important and complementary, but I wouldn't want to take away from that day at all, or just distract from it in a way. And the website, so by the way, the URL is votehousing.ca. If you're interested, you can go there. It'll go up probably the day before, so the 16th at some point, but certainly be live on Thursday the 17th. Stephen's asking about sending the slide deck. Yes, absolutely. We will send you a recording of this webinar, and we can send you the slide deck, Stephen, if you give us your email. But we'll definitely make that available for you to share it with your colleagues. Elspeth has a good point here, and Zane, we can talk a bit about the comm strategy in this. She's saying in Recovery for All, the campaign stressed the good sense of this, that it was cost effective compared to the uncoordinated mess of agencies and emergency services that get thrown at homelessness. Now, I don't see that argument in what you've presented today, as it still is an important part of it. If not, is there a reason for dropping it? So we haven't dropped it, and it'll definitely be part of the comm strategy. But maybe Zane, you want to expand on that?
No, I think it's a great point. Certainly not dropping it. Certainly will be part of our messaging as we go out and test messaging with a variety of Canadians in terms of what's not the easiest, but the most efficient and successful way to onboard them. But as part of our core message, as it relates to political parties and government, absolutely. There's a bit of a focal shift here that I would kind of mention, right? Where our initial messaging here is not just to a sitting government, right? But it is to all political parties, but also Canadians, right? Our target is kind of a little bit mixed this time, which is in the Recovery for All, it was very much you're coming in and you're advocating to government. This one's a little bit different, where we're going to try multiple different ways to figure out how do we get Canadians into the fold so that they can use their message, and we can then give them a handbook of like, here's some of the key messages why we think this is important, but then how they turn that into political power, right? So how they kind of elevate their engagement, so to speak. So that's a very long answer for you, but we have not dropped it by any stretch, no.
Awesome, thanks. There's a comment here. We have 1.7 million households in core housing need. In most cases, even if the individual or individuals are gainfully employed or pensioners, the problem is they can't afford the rents that are being demanded, but are obliged to pay them even if doing so leaves them broke. Why is the campaign asking for a much smaller number of new non-market housing units than the number that are actually urgently needed? Please explain. So this is a combination of two things. So we believe that we need to create at least 350,000 new units, but that's why we had an important comment here about rent supports. For a lot of people, there's both the need for the supply, but also the need for the demand side support, or the income support. And that's why the sixth bullet is really about rental assistance. Most of those 1.7 million households are living in housing that they can't afford, as you point out. So part of the exercise is making sure that that rental support is there for them. So making their current housing affordable and supporting them in it. And that 3/4 of that 1.7 million are in and out, get themselves out of rental, out of core housing need by improving their income. So, and it's a temporary measure. So the solution we're proposing is both construction, supply side, 350,000 units at least, and demand side is that financial support in their housing. Also, now we have just about 5 more minutes. So I want to make sure we try and get some more of these questions. Susan is saying, I think that teach-ins were very effective. Will that approach be used again? Zane, do you want to do some teach-ins?
I'm not familiar with what a teach-in is, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think it's I think it's like a meeting or an event where we're talking about the issues, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah. No, on the field side there, Susan. Yes, absolutely. Both training as well as like getting people caught up on the issue digitally, hopefully also offline as well. Yeah, going to be a core part of what we try to do as part of our suite of activities.
Awesome. Susan is saying that I feel the power of young people who may not be voting age was so important in the RFA campaign. What are your plans to engage with this demographic for vote housing, which they might view as excluding them?
It's a great question, one that we've been thinking of recently, of how do we ensure that young people who've been part of, and let's just be totally candid, leading so many movements, especially in the United States and other places, don't see themselves out of it. So I think the core activity here is to get people to pledge to vote housing. Our pledge will be explicitly going to mention that you don't have to be necessarily voting age, sorry, to sign it on. And then we're going to try to do a stream of activity that is very much trying to get young people to talk to decision makers and political decision makers about the fact that we can't vote, but you certainly can and have the authority to kind of control. You as individuals and electors across the country can vote, and you as political parties have the ability to control our future. We can't be left out of it. So there is some thought given to ensuring that not only are these folks not excluded, but they're frankly brought in, and then that there's a stream developed around their desire for advocacy that we have seen across the country.
Mm-hmm. Carolyn's got an interesting question for you, Zane. She's saying, it sounds like we'll be engaged in swing ridings. As a resident of a pretty safe riding, Ottawa Centre, should I focus my local energies on a nearby swing riding, Canada or Orleans, or should I focus my energy on my local member, Catherine McKenna, who's a very powerful minister?
Oh, it's a great question. The answer would kind of be a bit of both in that particular case, right? So the thing is, if you, let me answer more broadly and then I'll get to your specific question. More broadly, if you currently reside in a place that isn't a swing riding, we will have the ability for you to self-organize, to digitally organize, to help us in a way that does help move votes in areas that we know this election will be decided in. And so we'll allow, for that on a digital side. If you want to organize offline as well, then the choice is, to either if your region is perhaps a swing, but maybe your riding is not, to focus on that and hook you up with that sort of connection there. Or, if you have a very safe seat with an incumbent politician that is going to have a big voice at the decision-making table, or could, if they reform government in the question that was asked, then that's also a very valid way to organize. I hate to say the answer is case by case, but I feel like in certain situations, we want to give you the flexibility in terms of what you're comfortable with and give you a few options that are available digitally, or neighboring riding, or organizing in your riding with what you're comfortable with and where your capacity is.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why we're thinking too about a regional approach, right? Like we were thinking about groups of ridings together, so that we can sort of deploy people around as we need, depending on how the elections kind of shape up in each riding. I think we got time for one last point, and that's from Bill, who's saying, and this is a great point, that I'm living in a pretty affluent riding where the entry point to affordable housing is an issue people care about, though it's high home prices and young families that can't afford their first home they'd like to have to start families. How would you link that concern to your 6 platform points? I think that's a great question, because I'll maybe answer it by using an experience from recent history. So in Alberta in 2007-8, 7, 8, 9, actually, we were in a very similar spot that Canadians see themselves in now, where housing prices, everybody knew somebody who couldn't afford a mortgage, or was struggling with their, paying their rent, or knew somebody who, was having a problem. And that group, that made affordable housing, or housing affordability, a top 3 issue. And when we organized cities to go to the provincial government, led by Premier Stelmach at the time, to ask for affordable housing investment and ending homelessness, he saw in those numbers public support for doing something about housing affordability, and that led to an $800 million investment and a provincial commitment to end homelessness. So I think the entry point into the conversation is where people are, right? So they believe that housing affordability is an issue, they feel it, which makes it something that they will care about, and it's going to be an issue where, we may not be addressing affordability of home ownership per se, but we are talking about housing affordability more generally, and I think that provides some of the political cover to raise our issues, and certainly something that parties will translate into for them on their priorities. I'm not sure if I answered the question quite there, Zane, but I don't know if you wanted to jump in on that as well.
No, I think that's right, Tim.
All right, everyone. Well, it's now top of the hour. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us. We're going to email out some information. We'll email out a recording of the webinar. We'll might try and get the slide deck to folks. We'll make sure you get a link to endorse and support for more information. But on the 17th, be sure to tune in. We'll again get invitations out to folks to join the launch of the new campaign, and we will definitely be in touch. But if you're interested in volunteering, interested in supporting, that would be very, very welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Zane, any last?
No, I'll just say we'll send out an email with the deck, the video, the endorsement link, and you'll be hearing from us bright and early on the morning of launch day, where we'll officially launch, and you'll have access to our video and our website and all that sort of stuff as we get going. And thank you in advance for your questions. Well, thank you for your questions, and thank you in advance for your support going forward.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. We will be in touch very soon.
Take care.